What a fun, torturous ride that was. Welcome. This is going to be a long one. When I look at Nietzsche, it always brings this image of a man in front of me who is full of hatred against the people surrounding him because of their mediocrity and because of their inability to challenge existing norms, inability to think for themselves about the meaning of what they are doing, what they are saying, and the values they hold, which form the basis of this book. Genealogy would mean to trace back the origin of the different value systems you hold. What is good? What is bad? Where did that come from? What is truth? And to tackle these questions, you get this guy who is so far ahead of his time, who is willing to take the brave step of stepping into the unknown desert and going as far as his thought processes will take him, staying there, being bold enough to stay there and question why things are a certain way, and is it really all for the betterment of humanity, or are there any ulterior motives of people who are pushing this ideology on all of you? No one questions it, and we have Nietzsche who does, but he doesn't have anyone to discuss it with because there is no one like him. He has no friends. Imagine being in such a position, so far ahead of your game, so incisive in your thought, so critical in your analysis that you leave no room for error, which you criticize in yourself and in truth, that towards the end of your life you are unable to deal with the magnitude of your thoughts and you die because of some mental instability caused by that. Imagine how great his thinking must have been and how deep he must have gone in the recesses of his own mind to come up with all his theories and ideas. Absolutely incredible. So, undoubtedly, one of the greatest philosophers of our times. We are lucky to even comprehend a fraction of what he is trying to say, which is what I tried to do again. And all of this is to say that this book has all of that. And I'm going to give a few warnings before I begin. The main one of which is that if you are a casual reader, don't touch this book. You will not get it. You will waste hours and hours trying to understand it, and you will still not get it. You need to have proper context. You need to have all the proper mindset in your place to challenge your beliefs. If you are an everyday casual reader, pick something easy. This is not that. The second is that you need to be at least somewhat familiar with Nietzsche's earlier work. This genealogy of morals comes fairly later in his chronological works, much after Thus Spoke Zarathustra and Beyond Good and Evil, if I'm not wrong. He also mentions the gay science quite frequently in this text. I'm not saying that you have to have read all of those and understood all of those completely to get into this. I'm definitely not saying that. But you need to know the basics, let's say, which is where I am in my Nietzsche journey. What happens if you don't do this is that you come up with some very wild interpretations of what he actually meant, and you don't want to be there, trust me. So that is the second warning. Do we have anything else? I want to get some semantics out of the way. First of all, the pronunciation. Some people say Nietzsche, some people say Nietzsche. Some people call it something else entirely. I don't know. But I know that one of them is the German version. I think Friedrich Nietzsche is the German way to say it, and the other one is the anglicized version. So let's get that out of the way. I've always remembered him as Nietzsche, so we'll stick to that. The second is the name of the text itself. Now, when Nietzsche wrote this, he titled it Zur Genealogie der Moral, ein Streitschrift. Now, the der Moral part, obviously, all of this is German, and there is some German influence in the writing and even the etymology of words used. I'll give a brief example right after this. But the der Moral part has been translated a couple of ways. Some people call it genealogy of morality, some people call it on the genealogy of morals, because der Moral translates to moral in their head. But from what I can understand, the moral here is a umbrella term for all of different morals. So if we are being prudent, the proper translation would be, quote, on the genealogy of morality. Now, moral is a German umbrella term here that encompasses many different morals. So you cannot just say the genealogy of morals. It has to be on the genealogy of morality. Now, a quick mention of the translation that I'm using. It's by Carol Deet in the Cambridge University Press. Very good translation. Absolutely recommend that. And a quick note on Ein Streitschrift as well. This again has been translated as a polemic. Streitschrift, it's hard to say because it's a critical analysis, but the actual meaning of the word more emphasizes more on being a sharp critique, a ruthless, incisive analysis. That is the meaning of the word. So you have to have that in mind, that Nietzsche is going to take a point, take a ideology or a word even, go to the depths of its original intended meaning, talk about how it came about and how it can be interpreted in a very incisive, in a very crude, in a very analytical, sharp, witty sense. That is the meaning of this title. Now that we have the basic semantics out of the way, and just to give a brief example of how genealogy works, he takes the word schlecht, German for bad, if you know German, and you take the word schlicht, which can be translated as plain, simple, although einfach is a more popular way to convey the same meaning, let's say. Also, schlicht happens to be the root word for the English abuse shit. So anyway, now you ask etymologically, why are schlecht and schlicht so similar in their etymology? And you realize that all the morals that were passed down were from the viewpoint of the nobility, the aristocracy. Are the common people, are the poor people inherently bad? No. But you use the words in such a way that even they make that association from schlecht to schlecht. Another glaring use of etymology to do this is even for the morality of good. So good in German will be gut, G-U-T, and you have a tribe of people, very famously the Germanic tribe of Goths, who were these blonde hair, well-built, muscular, very attractive. So that was seen to be good. So you associate Goths with good, and that's how you get the word good. So again, rehashing the same question, are Goths inherently good? No, but the culture is such that they were viewed as superior or desirable, and they get the good, the moral good. Are they common people, the plebeians, the everyday man? Are they bad? No. But if you look at it from a king's viewpoint or a warrior's viewpoint, you see that, oh no, they are shit, schlecht, schlicht. So that is how genealogy works. This used more of etymology to drive home the point that the morals of good, what is bad, what is evil, All of these are descended from somewhere, and they form how you look at society, how you look at other people. And you have to challenge those and break those to move forward with a new, fresh perspective in life. And this is not because this way of thinking is wrong or that this is historically inaccurate. No, it's simply because this way of thinking has led to the downfall of humanity, according to Nietzsche. The whole purpose of this text is to awaken people to a better way of life. It's not to disprove or give a science lesson on etymology of words. It is to say that this way of thinking that you have been living by, it has caused you more harm than good, and there is a better way to live, a will to power, if you will. Sorry if you have not read that, but okay, you have to have a different viewpoint that is much better than this one. That is a overarching idea that I took away from this book. There are many more. Let's see my notes. Incisive against every group. For whatever reason, Nietzsche comes across as someone who really hates the everyday man as equally as he does the nobility or the people in the political spectrum or in the priest class, state sponsored religion, let's say. So you get to hear some very choice words by him. One of my favorites is in section 2.3. Let me quickly give you an idea of what that looks like when Nietzsche is really angry on someone. Quote, we Germans certainly do not regard ourselves as particularly cruel or hard-hearted people, still less as particularly irresponsible and happy-go-lucky, but you only have to look at our old penal code in order to see how difficult it was on this earth to breed a nation of thinkers, by which I mean the nation in Europe that still contains the maximum of reliability, solemnity, tastelessness, and sobriety, qualities which give it the right to breed all sorts of European Mandarin. These Germans made a memory for themselves with dreadful methods in order to master their basic plebeian instincts and the brutal crudeness of the same. Think of old German punishments such as stoning. Even the legends drop the millstone on the guilty person's head. Breaking on the wheel, a unique invention and specialty of German genius in the field of punishment. Impaling, ripping apart and trampling to death by horses, quartering. Boiling of the criminal in oil or wine. Still in the 14th and 15th centuries, the popular flaying, cutting strips, cutting out flesh from the breast, and of course coating the wrongdoer with honey and leaving him to the flies in the scorching sun. With the aid of such images and procedures, man was eventually able to retain 5 or 6 I don't want to's in his memory, in connection with which a promise has been given in order to enjoy the advantages of society. And there you are. With the aid of this sort of memory, people finally came to reason. Ah, reason, solemnity, mastering of emotions, this really dismal thing called reflection. All these privileges and splendors man has, what a price had to be paid for them, how much blood and horror lies at the basis of all good things. End quote. Now you can see how utterly disappointed and disgusted he is with all of human history. Obviously, Germans get the most flack because the guy is German, so he goes more into their history than any other. But if you, I'm sure, go into Mongol history, you'll find the same thing. If you go into Persian history, you'll find the same thing. The same crudest of punishments to get across points, and you don't even fulfill that promise. Utterly ridiculous human history is, and Nietzsche just highlights that, and he also gives us solutions. Let us come to that eventually. Let's see what else I've written. What a incredible way to convey your points. I love the book in its entirety. Let's see. Rumination is a prerequisite which people have conveniently forgotten. Self-explanatory. Let's see. Good was defined by upper nobility as the actions they took, and common folk began seeing it that way too. True, because you have a class of society that aspires to be good, so you always have the same things copied. If a noble or someone from the nobility wears a certain dress, you would also try to aspire to wear that. So that's where even values are transcending from. Usefulness was nowhere to be found. Exactly. None of this was inherently good. What we call good today is from the eyes of the rich, elitist, entitled person. At least that was the case until people came to reason, and we'll come to the revolution here. You see, the Jewish revolution, the slave revolt. Again, this forms the main thesis of the first essay, saying that Christianity made it cool to suffer. Christianity made it cool to be obedient to God. Earlier, you had these warriors, you had statues of Zeus and Achilles, who were larger than life figures who achieved greatness by killing people, by showing their quote unquote manhood, let's say. But after Christianity comes into power, this is inverted, or where he introduces this concept of resentiment. If you have read Nietzsche, you have to be acquainted with this term, resentiment, which is internalized hatred basically. You have nowhere to channel your anger, so you do it to yourself. You reprimand yourself for whatever, you not being good enough, not being good looking enough, not being strong enough, not being competent enough, let's say. And this happens because, or as a result of the Jewish re-evaluation. Thanks to Christianity, by the way, for doing this, because no longer are the humble and meek people, the poor people, seen as bad, seen as schlicht. You take that and you make that into virtue. If you are humble, if you are full of humility, that is seen as a good thing. But is that what life is supposed to be? No one knows. Why don't you try a different way of living, of being boastful, of being strong, powerful? And somehow, somewhere along the road, we lost this connection from life. Maybe when you are a hunter gatherer society, you have again being strong as a good thing, but it's no longer the case. People today are okay with not being strong enough. And I'm not saying that Nietzsche argues that it should be the other way around, but he's saying that that is the cause of it. When Christianity comes, you see a inversion of this sentiment that if you are not charitable enough, if you don't help people, you are weak, you are bad. If you ruthlessly kill people, or in corporations of today amass wealth and not distribute it amongst people who are less well to do, then you are weak, you are bad. This inversion of values happens thanks to Christianity. Great idea. Just keep that in mind next time you think of what is good and evil. All of this is because of the Christian values suddenly becoming cool and desirable. Today's Europe reeks of tame, failed, tired, and exhausted people. You see, because Christianity doesn't reprimand people for being so. It embraces people who are less well to do, let's say. And you definitely need a break from that. You need to stop with the laziness and strive or will to power. Are allowed to call yourself a higher man if you say yes to life. Yeah, there are no more role models. They are all evil. And where is the celebration of life? Why don't we celebrate someone who has made it? Why is it always with a negative lens that we look at him? Be it, okay, I don't want to take examples, but you know, the people that are celebrated today, if you look at them, do they remind you of a life well lived? It's always with a negative lens that we look at them, that they reach there, and again, rightfully so, maybe, that they reach there at the expense of others, but isn't that something to be applauded? Does every successful person be looked at through a negative lens? Again, I'm not sure. Christian morality glorifies suffering, obedience, and humility. Right. If you follow the Bible, if you submit to God, as the phrase goes, then you are good. But if you are prideful in your abilities, if you demonstrate strength, then you are suddenly bad. Interesting how values change over time. And this didn't happen overnight, obviously. It's a 1,000-year project. Christianity is now today more popular than ever, and it took 2,000 years to get this inversion of values. So there are no statistics to say that this is a cycle or this will repeat, but you have to think for yourself. And that's how I realized that Nietzsche is a genius. There is no precedent. You have to go into the depth of your mind and think for yourself to even come up with these theories. We are incredibly lucky to even be able to understand all of this. So thank you, Nietzsche, I guess. Let's see. Essay 2 is called, okay, I don't know if I mentioned this, but the entire book has 3 essays and a preface, which isn't that big, but the 3 essays, all of them are independent of each other. So the third one is the biggest one that has to deal with ascetic ideals, and the second one, I think, is to do with bad conscience and how humans blame themselves, and that is guilt building up in themselves. So let's see what Nietzsche has to say about that. When sovereign man recognizes his power and freedom, he calls his instincts conscience. Executions, cutting flesh and limbs, suffering and cruelty were compensation for death. See, this is the origin of punishment. This is how the flaying of the skin, quartering people comes into being. You have creditors and debtors. You take a loan and you're not able to pay back. You can ask for a pound of his flesh in Merchant of Venice style, and this is where punishment comes in. That is the origin of punishment and debt even. So very important concepts to keep in mind when you are subjected to some punishment. The original purpose was to give back something to society, but is today's penitentiaries keeping that in mind? You have multitude of reasons where people are today punished and thrown into jail. Such an absurd system. You have someone who has committed financial fraud who receives 10 years in jail, let's say, and you have someone who rapes or commits sexual assault on someone else, and he is also in jail for 5 years. In what universe is this supposed to make sense? Punishment is, again, the core reason of punishment should be, again, multitude of reasons: deterrence, uh, getting the person guilty so as to again not repeat the crime. But the origin of it was this system of someone gave something and wasn't able to give it back, so you punish him, and you use that system to today's society with no reform whatsoever. So don't you see a discrepancy in this? So ask yourself what's wrong with the system, and you'll come up with your own answers. You have learned to blame yourself for the mistakes you commit. It's something that is in your brain. It's a sickness that you need to get rid of by yourself. Let's see what else I have. Resentiment we already talked about briefly. There is 16. The life in its purest form or in its original form was just and unjust as concepts arise after you set up a legal system that assigns value to the crime itself, which in itself is reducing it to the perceived value, which is the example that I gave. Hence, when you punish, the purpose and the meaning of it is lost. Very true. The origin of bad conscience is internalized hatred. Man hating himself is the greatest disease. Atheism will free you from debt you imagine you owed your ancestors. Origin of God in fear. This was again how interesting that when you think of God, does he inspire you or are you more afraid of him? It's always in the terms of God is watching or God will punish me in hell through these ways. It's never a positive image that God inspires you to do. God died for your sins, so don't do it again, or you must suffer because you committed a sin. How absurd. And yet, that is the ideology that has permeated through time. Interesting, very interesting. Greek gods took guilt upon themselves and glorified freedom, instincts. But Jesus, who took punishment upon himself and guilt tripped man into causing him pain through his wrongdoings. Very true, very true. Make will free. This is the embodiment of the entire essay. You have to be willing. That is the whole point. Remove yourself from these shackles of religion and astrology and start thinking for yourself. Ask what you want and give it your everything. How can you give something to society? How can you take up a challenge and fulfill that? Do that. Don't follow some scripture or some text that says that you have to act in this way, because the purpose of that was to keep man in fear. They didn't want you to flourish and succeed, they wanted sheep. So go forth and will what you want to. There's a brief mention of Zarathustra which I liked right towards the end. And then we have the longest essays of them all, essay number 3 with the ascetic ideals. To give brief overview, you have this again previously introduced concepts of guilt, being humble, being obedient to God, and suffering. All of these are ascetic ideals that the priest of today espouses, and Nietzsche argues against all of these by very many ways how philosophers deal with it. What are aesthetic ideals and why are they there? How artists deal with it. How you can overcome them. Let's see. Oh, there's a brief section of text where he goes too critical on Wagner for not finishing his life's work the way he supposed it to be, and Schopenhauer being Wagner's wingman. Did you really have to go that hard? I'm not sure. Did it really annoy you that much that you put even 1 or 2 sections on them? Maybe you can give people a break and talk about the ideas, but obviously he was demonstrating a point, and I am also kidding here, but sure, you could have not gone that hard as well. Anyway, let's see where we are. Where should you direct your aggression caused by your suffering? Very interesting again, because suffering is the truth of life. So when you are suffering, you don't know where to channel your anger. Should you, well, what you have been doing is you have been angry at yourself. Why did God make me do this? Or how did God let me suffer? What wrong did I do in my past that I have to suffer like this? You go into that mode. So stop doing that. Stop blaming yourself for the suffering you are going through. And this is more of a Buddhist, even Brahminic way of thinking, that you don't have suffering is a way of life, true, but you should not direct that anger and aggression towards yourself. That is resentiment, of course, but you have to channel it somewhere else. Now, look for an outlet, and Nietzsche only gives a few ways of doing this, but I'm sure there are many more. But art, music, and writing, even, and in the work that you do, all of these are ways in which you can show your anger. I think a good way to do this would be the gym, let's say, where you can throw all your anger away that your suffering is causing you. Classic breakup advice, let's say. And that, I feel, is what we should all do more, instead of blaming ourselves and going in circles, because your suffering, at least most of it, is because you are unable to deal with that suffering. So why should you torture yourself more? You have to look ahead, channel it somewhere else. So thank you, Nietzsche, for making all of us gym rats again. What else do we have? What creative outlet can I pour this pain into? True. What real challenge can I take on that's worthy of my energy? What part of myself do I want to leave behind or overcome? What would it mean to affirm life, not flee from it? Very true. All of these are questions that are very individualistic, but you have to answer them and follow through with them. You cannot direct your anger towards yourself. Please don't do that. A quick tip if you are reading this essay, that I extensively use ChatGPT to understand all of the different things that are going on. I've already mentioned how difficult the text is and how difficult understanding it is. So if you are stuck anywhere, ChatGPT is a very good resource to understand the different things that Nietzsche uses to explain his point. Don't run away from your self-respect, pride, exactly the things that Christianity or any other religion for that matter tells you, kama, krodha, whatever else there is. Every religion tells you that these are things that you should avoid or things that are bad. But ask yourself, are they? Or where did this come from? Why is pride bad? Why is boasting bad? When you do that, you will find some positives and some negatives. So you leave behind the bad part and go forward with what's good about it. And he also reveres Kant with his struggles with astrology and how religion was used to control people again. Okay, let's see what else I have. Science is not the antithesis of religion. Exactly. We have so much scientific progress, and we always think that science is the enemy of religion, but that is not the truth at all, because even science has reached where it has reached because of it following something called the scientific temperament, which also espouses working diligently towards one goal. But you have no reason to do that. Did you ask why you are doing that? Why you have to be humble and dedicated to your goals if you want to achieve something? No, you don't have a basis to do that. So science and religion follow a similar methodology to get to some end point, but they are not antitheses of each other. What is? Well, will to power, as I've mentioned earlier as well. That is the true antithesis to all the suffering and all the religion and science thrown at your face. Earlier, people endured suffering because it was given a purpose, punishment for a sin, a test of the soul, a path to salvation, or a sign of devotion to God. That, see, God is punishing me. That was how it was earlier. The ascetic ideal, especially Christianity, gave suffering a moral and spiritual justification. With the decline of religion and metaphysical beliefs, with mediums and ghosts, let's say, people no longer believe those justifications. Science and rationalism have eroded faith in old meanings, so you have to look for new meanings. Be brave enough and start willing. We must go beyond slave morality, guilt, and ascetic ideals and create new values that affirm life, not deny it. All this cycle of getting your value structures from already existing definitions, when you are shown that all of that was coming trickling down from nobility or trickling down from the inversion of values after Christianity, even after you know the history of morals such as what is good, what is bad, what is evil, what is unjust, what is justice, even after knowing all of that, will you continue down the same path, or will you look for new meanings that affirm life, that spread life, that allow you to push your boundaries and reach for the stars? That is up to you. And this requires courage. And that is because you no longer have a fallback. Earlier, you had a basis in the Bible or in science or in whatever viewpoint that was shared by a collective society. You could blame it on God, you could blame it on science, but are you brave enough to let go of all of that and start anew? Because it means living without the comforting illusions of the old. How very poignant and true. Nietzsche, if you read very sincerely, is not at all a nihilistic man full of hatred. He is just tired with mediocrity and the status quo. He wants the better for you. He wants you to be a fan of yourself, for the lack of a better word. He wants you to achieve what you want to achieve, not what science says you should achieve, or what history says, or what religion says. So if you are brave enough, you can go down this path. It's not going to be easy because we have Nietzsche himself going down that path, and as I mentioned earlier, he dies of a mental illness because he is not able to come to terms with his thought process. So, will you risk that, or will you sit back in your cushion and go back to your everyday routine? That is the question. These were my rough thoughts. I'm sure there is a lot more that Nietzsche talks about. In particular, I want to shout out the ideas of truth. What is truth? What is the value of truth? If you pursue truth, is that good? Is it actually causing you good? Again, overarching thoughts. You can answer all of these for yourselves. You can criticize other philosophers and ascetic ideals that is there. You can read up more on the will to power that I have briefly mentioned here and there, because it forms a basis for many of Nietzsche's arguments or alternatives, let's say. He talks a lot about how nihilism is promoted by ascetic ideals and how we should look for alternatives in art or work, let's say. But that should do it for my review. Thank you very much for listening. I had a blast reading this, and you should too if you give it time and the seriousness with which it should be read. Thank you.